Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary and today's video is going to be my first wrap up of 2025. So I'm going to be talking in this video about all the books that I read in January and letting you know how I felt about them. I'm going to go through these in the order in which I enjoyed them. So I'm going to start with the books that I DNF'd because I did DNF 3 books so far this year. And then I will go through from the worst books to the best books. Just a reminder, these are my personal opinions and like my personal thoughts on these books. If I don't like a book that you love, I'm glad that you loved it, to put the caveat out there. But to start with the books that I DNF'd in January. So I did DNF 3 books, and 2 of these 3 I DNF'd in a vlog that I did. So I will link that vlog. It was the vlog where I read dragon books. I DNF'd 2 of the books in that. And then I also DNF'd 1 other book. So the first book that I DNF'd in January was VenCo by Cherie, Dimaline, which is a witch book. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about this. It was very slow and it wasn't really holding my attention, and I just overall wasn't enjoying it. But it's essentially about this woman who, as far as I got, she was the 5th member of this coven that decided that they needed her to have like a fully formed coven. So the other members of this coven were going to seek her out to try to get her to come join their coven. And where I got, she met the other people. And I just really I didn't really care for it. So I put that one down. Unfortunately, it was not holding my attention. I also put down Rebelwing by Andrea Tang. This was in my dragon vlog. So this is a YA dystopian book where there's dragons, but the dragons in this world were robotic. And that just really didn't work for me. I just didn't really care about it. I thought that the rebel group thing was interesting, but I've read other books that do the same thing better. So it just really wasn't for me. And then I also DNF'd The Remarkable Retirement of Edna Fisher by E.M. Anderson. This is a cozy fantasy with dragons, and it's a subversion on the Chosen One trope that I thought would be really enjoyable, where the Chosen One is this 83-year-old woman, Edna Fisher. And I just overall I don't vibe with cozy very well. So the plot wasn't giving enough for me to really be that invested. I do think it would be like a funny movie maybe, but ultimately it was not for me. So now to go to the books that I gave 2 stars. I did have 3 2 stars in January. So the first one was I Might Be in Trouble by Daniel Aleman. This was a suspense book, I guess. It's like literary suspense, but the premise is that this guy is a writer and he's trying to find the next plot idea for his book. And he wakes up next to the man that he had a one-night stand with, and the guy is dead. And then all the shenanigans he gets into to try not to get pinned for the murder of this guy. And he ends up using that as inspiration for his story. I just parts of this were really engaging, and I did want to know how it ended up, but I just didn't really care for it, if that makes sense. It didn't really do anything for me. I also gave A Botanist's Guide to Parties and Poisons by Khavari 2 stars. This is another cozy. It's a cozy mystery, and it was set in the 20s, and that was my biggest problem with this book, is that it didn't match the setting. So I would forget that it was set in the 20s, but the premise is it's this woman who is an academic in the 20s in London, and she's the only woman in, I think it's University College is where she is, but she's the only woman on staff. Her dad used to be on staff as a botanist, and now she's on staff as a botany assistant to a professor or something. And she goes to this party, a person is poisoned. Her boss, who is the head of the botany department, is presumed to be the killer, and so she spends the rest of the book trying to figure out who actually killed her and how she actually got poisoned. I keep saying killed her. She doesn't die. She gets poisoned and then goes into a coma and then lives, which is not a spoiler, I don't think. I don't know why I was under the impression that she was going to die, but the stakes are very low in that sense as well. And I don't know. I just the best part of this book, there's kind of a romantic subplot with her and then this guy who studies, was it microbiomes, germs and stuff. And they had a really cute relationship and cute interactions. And I assume there's more books in the series. I will not be continuing, but I assume that their relationship will flourish throughout the rest of the series. But again, I'm not going to read it because I just didn't ultimately care for it. Cozies, once again, just are not for me. So I also gave Another Country by James Baldwin 2 stars. Hear me out. I read this for a vlog as well. It's very long. That's the first thing. And what I talked about in the vlog, so this is about a group of bohemians, I guess, in the 60s, maybe 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, somewhere in there in New York City. And our main character is this guy who is a Black man. He's in a relationship with a white woman, so a lot of it is about their relationship. He's very misogynistic towards her, and also he keeps getting in trouble and then like exploring relationships with men. And so one of the points of view you get later is a man that he had previously had a relationship with, whose name I believe is Eric. I don't know why I'm not remembering the main guy's name, but I'm not. And then he's also friends with this couple who are writers, and they have kids. And so it's just like about these people and their relationship dynamics, and his sister plays a big role in it. And it's sort of like about his life to a point, and then it's about like everyone else around him, if that makes sense. And again, I thought it was a very like interesting exploration. It does talk about queerness in a really interesting way, especially for that time. And it talks about like race relations and different things relating to that. So there is like racism, there is homophobia in here, but both of those felt like they were purposefully being addressed. And then there's a ton of misogyny in this book that it just felt like was the attitude of the author, if that makes sense. Like it wasn't being addressed as like, this is wrong, or like no one was struggling with it. It just was the way it was. And that was what really rubbed me the wrong way. So I understand that that's like part of the time, but that was what caused me to not really enjoy my read of that. Moving on to 2.5 stars. I read the Blazewrath games by Amparo Ortiz, which is a part of a duology. I'm not going to be continuing because it doesn't end on a cliffhanger. So I feel good about just reading the first book. It was fine. It was like literally the most fine book ever. Like very fine. Nothing super negative to say about it. It just wasn't for me. This was another dragon book that I read in my dragon vlog, so I will link that for you. It's about this game. And in this world, magic exists. So there are people who are witches, there are dragons, but dragons like have a person that becomes their like bonded rider, if that makes sense. And our main character, her name's Lana. She's Puerto Rican, but she lives in the US. And so she's got like a bit of a identity crisis, I guess, with that. And her dad works with dragons. She doesn't have magic. She is not tied to a dragon, but there's this game where 6 people ride dragons. And I don't really understand the mechanics of the game. I don't picture things when I read, so I wasn't able to like visualize what was happening. But the people who are riding dragons are trying to like fight each other, I think. And then there are people just on the ground called runners, and they are running to try to make points, is how I basically understand. So our main character wants to be a runner since she doesn't have a dragon. And I will say the most interesting part of this book to me was the relationship between the people and the dragons, because the people who are tied to a dragon can like feel the dragon's emotions and like they have a link, but you get that described to you as Lana is like seeing it happen, and the people who it's happening to are telling her about it. But I think it would have been really cool to like be in that, if that makes sense. And there's a subplot where a guy who used to play the games and have a dragon is now maybe a bad guy, and he is trying to like take over the world with like an evil dragon that has been trapped in human form. So that's like the subplot going on. I think that's actually the main plot, but it's the part that I cared the least about. Again, not a bad book at all. Very fine. Now we are going to go through the books that I gave 3 stars. Starting out, the first book that I read this year was Good Material by Dolly Alderton. And this is about a guy who's a comedian. He's like a struggling comedian. He's been in this relationship with this woman named Jen for a number of years. I don't know exactly how long it is, but he's in his mid to late 30s, and he and Jen have just broken up. And he's spending the whole book trying to figure out why they've broken up. I will tell you, I did not like him at all as a character. And the best part of this book for me was the very end when you get Jen's point of view. I think it's like the last 15-20%, but that wasn't enough to like bump this book higher than 3 stars. It did bump it from 2 stars to 3 stars because I enjoyed the end so much. I thought it was so like clever, but this was just a very plotting book. I was pretty disappointed by this one just because I've read other Dolly Aldertons that I really, really loved. I guess I've only read her memoir that I loved, but I loved that book. It's called Everything I Know About Love. So good. But this one, fine. The main character kind of reminded me of the main character of Baby Reindeer. The plot is not at all the same, but like the struggling comedian thing, the like feeling like you're the butt of everyone's joke, the being in your 30s and not having anything figured out. He's not stalked or anything, but I did think that was like really interesting. That's who I was like thinking of as I was reading this book. So I don't know. The next book I gave 3 stars was The Other Valley by Scott Alexander Howard. This is a dystopian book, and it's a really interesting premise. I just didn't like the like writing of it. And again, I really loved the ending. I thought the ending was very, very thought-provoking and like well done. But the premise of this one is it's set in a world where there are 3 valleys, and the middle valley is where our main character lives. But if you go to the valley to the east, you are 20 years in the past, and if you go to the valley to to the west, you were 20 years in the future. Because it's the same world, just in different times, if that makes sense. Like, the same people live there. I don't know. It's kind of hard to, like, wrap your brain around, but really interesting concept. I've never seen anything like it. But there's a ministry where you can apply to go to either the future or the past, and you have to be approved in your timeline, and then they have to approve you in whatever timeline you're going to, and then you get to go for like a set period amount of time. And the premise of this book is our main character starts out, she's like 13, 14, and she's trying to get an internship. She might be older than that, but it's like they're in high school, they're trying to get an internship to find out like what they want to do for the rest of their lives, and she gets an internship with this ministry to look through people's applications to go to a different time or to come to her time. And she also, at the same time, there's a boy in her class, she sees his parents come to her time, which typically means that something is going to happen to him. So she figures out that it's his parents coming from 20 years in the future to see him again. So she knows that he's going to die soon, probably. And the ministry, she tells somebody that she knows, and the ministry's like, you can't tell anyone else. Like, it's supposed to be a secret. And it's basically about how that secret, like, derails her entire life. Like, the ending is so good, but the getting there, I just thought was so boring, unfortunately. So, like, it's something that, as I'm describing it, I'm like, I should have loved this book. It just didn't work for me. And I don't know why that is. It's one of those books, though, that I'm like, maybe on reread, knowing what's coming, I would like it more. I don't know, though. Another book that I think could be a great movie or show or something. Like, I think it would be really interesting to see it adapted. The other 3-star that I have, I'm sad about this one too. I'm really disappointed. But Where the Library Hides by Isabel Ibanez. One of my favorite books of last year was, what is it called? The first book in the series. I'll hopefully put a picture here. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head now. But it's like a historical fantasy, kind of. It's very light fantasy. So I will say, like, I kind of wish this book didn't have magic, because I feel like it would have been better for it. Like, it didn't need the magic, and the magic was like kind of weird. It's like objects that you find relating to Cleopatra. Our main character has like a magical tie to her, and I thought that was going to go a different direction than it did in book 2. I'm not going to tell you much about book 2, but the premise of book 1 is that this girl, Inez, her parents are like explorers in Egypt, and they're looking for the tomb of Cleopatra, and they die, or they're missing, presumed dead. And she gets a letter from her uncle telling her this. She's back in Argentina. Her family has been in Egypt. And she decides she's going to go to Egypt to look for her family, or like to get closure from this. And then when she's there, she kind of starts uncovering all these secrets. And I loved the vibes of book 1. There's also like a romantic subplot with this character, Wit. I loved the romantic subplot. That was my favorite and least favorite part of the second book, because since they get together at the end of book 1, or like they kind of get together, things have to go wrong. And I didn't love that. Like, I didn't love the way their relationship went in book 2. I'll just leave it at that because I don't want to spoil anything. But I was intrigued enough by this book the whole time to keep reading, but it didn't deliver what I wanted it to deliver, I guess. Like, and there was a plot twist that I don't think made any sense. But I would love to hear other people's thoughts on it if you've read it. It just came out at the end of last year. And also, like, if you loved book 1 and you read book 2, how did you feel about it? I'm just desperate to know, because I was expecting this to become like a favorite duology or favorite series, and it just book 2 didn't really hit for me, unfortunately. Another book that I gave 3 stars is actually a book that I own. I bought it recently. That is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Where to even begin with this book? I went through phases where I was really enjoying this book, and then phases where I was like actively disliking reading it. And I don't really know how to reconcile that. So this is supposed to be adult fantasy. I think if you look at it as young adult, you'll like it more. But the premise is there's this girl whose name I'm not going to remember. Cassiopeia. I don't know how they pronounce it. Cassiopeia, whatever. And she is in Mexico. It's the 20s, again, the jazz age. And she accidentally uncovers that her family has been hiding a god on behalf of another god. So it has to do with like Mayan mythology, which is really interesting. I've never read anything with that. Then she releases this god that's been trapped, and he's got to go find all the other parts of him that are hidden by the other gods. And so she goes on this adventure with him, and it was fine. You know, like, there were parts that I really, really enjoyed, and there were parts that I just like did not care at all about. And 3 stars. I also read Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellers. I gave that 3 stars. This one is, It's like, I think it was considered like sad girl lit fic, kind of like the same Otessa Moshfegh vibes, sort of, but it's about this woman who is 24. She's a struggling artist in New York City. She's from London. She's not close to her family. And one night she meets this much older man and they like fall in love and get married, and it's about their relationship and the toxicity of their relationship. It's also about like family patterns repeating. Again, it sounds like something I would like, but I found all of the characters insufferable. The character I like the most, you sometimes get the point of view of Zoe, who is the younger half sister, I guess, of Frank, the Frankenstein. It's Cleo and Frank, but they called each other Cleopatra and Frankenstein when they first like met. And so that's why the book is called that. And his sister Zoe is like my favorite character from this, but it was fine. Like there's nothing horrendous about it, but I just didn't like love the story that was like, the writing was fine. I would read more from Coco Mellers, but I just didn't love this book. So unfortunately for me. The last book I gave 3 stars is another one that I'm pretty disappointed by. But this one, as soon as the plot twist hit, I kind of knew I wasn't gonna like it. Just because I know my taste a little bit, but I wanted to finish it just to see how it goes. And it was pretty like predictable and I was right. But it's a love song for Ricki Wilde by Tia Williams. I heard amazing things about this book, which is why I was so hyped to read it. It's a romance book about a woman who her family owns like funeral homes, but like really upscale funeral homes in Atlanta. And she's the youngest daughter by a lot. Like she was a late in life baby. I think her closest sister is like 15 years older than her or something. And so she has never really fit in with her family, and her sisters are all very close, but they're not close to her. And she's always been the black sheep. And she decides that instead of running one of these funeral homes, like she's supposed to open up a franchise, she decides she's going to move to Harlem and open up a flower shop. And so that's what she does. She's got this like florist Instagram that has been taking off, and she goes to Harlem and does this. And then when she's there, she meets this mysterious man in a garden, and you find out more about him as the book goes along. I don't know if it's a spoiler. I knew immediately what was happening, kind of. I was kind of wrong on my first impression, but I don't know if it's a spoiler to say what is actually going on, so I won't. But there's like a magical realism twist, and ultimately I just didn't like it very much. The twist. I thought the writing was good. I also I wasn't totally sold on the romance, so I might read another Tia Williams to see if she can do something else, like if she does more contemporary romance that doesn't have a magical realism twist that rubs me the wrong way. But I just felt like it was a lot. The whole thing was a lot to buy into for me, and that really hindered my experience reading it. I have 2 3.5 stars to talk about. The first is Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. But this book is so strange. I feel like it needs to come with a lot of trigger warnings that I didn't have when I read it, because it's about this woman who starts out the book as a child and she's being sexually abused. And that abuse is like coloring everything that happens to her from that point on. But she has this cousin who they're kids, right? They're like 8 or 10 or something. And the cousin thinks that he is an alien. And he always talks about the like adults around them as the Earthlings. And this child who's being abused, latches onto that idea and carries it into adulthood. And it affects all of her relationships, all of her life. This book is kind of oddly funny, and it has a very like odd twist at the end. But like I enjoyed my read of it. I just was shocked that I've never heard anyone talk about what it's about. And I think that this author writes a lot of like odd fiction, but I think it's important to know the subtext, I guess, of what's happening so that you're not caught off guard by it if that's something that's gonna like really affect you, because it really does affect a lot of people. So I'm not a person that's like triggered by things. I am bothered by things, and this book was like disgusting at parts, but I don't know. I'm really glad that I read it. And the other book that I gave 3.5 stars this month was Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. I rounded both of these up to 4 on Goodreads, by the way, because I would say I enjoyed them more than I thought they were fine. Like I had a more positive experience, I guess. Happiness Falls is about this family who the dad goes missing. He's a stay-at-home dad, and his primary job is to watch. They have a child that has angel syndrome, which I don't really know that much about it, but the way it's described is that he always seems happy, even when he's like upset, mad, angry. He just like always looks really happy. And he's also nonverbal autistic. And so it's about this mystery. The dad goes missing. The son comes home one day without him. And we're from the perspective of the sister. And she is like 20, I think, home from college. She has a twin brother, so we get his perspective sometimes. His name is John. I can't remember her name for some reason. But regardless, they and their mom are trying to find their dad. And then there's like CPS involved because the kid was involved in some, like he was crossing the street, he was by himself. And so CPS gets involved. There's like a CPS case ongoing while they're like looking for this dad. And it was very like family drama, which isn't a bad thing, but I was just kind of left wanting by the ending. Like I think if it had had a stronger ending, I would have liked it more, but I don't necessarily think this isn't a bad book. Like I enjoyed my read of it. It got to the end and I was like, okay. So to me, that's like I had a positive experience reading it, but it just wasn't that positive. I don't know. So 3.5 stars for that one. Now I have a couple of 4 stars to talk about. I have 3 4 stars to talk about. I gave a lot of 5 stars this month, which is good. I want to be reading things that I like. So first 4 star I'm going to talk about is A Lady's Guide to Mischief and Mayhem by Amanda Collins. I really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was a sequel to the other Lady's Guide book that I read, but they're different. They have different authors. They just both are A Lady's Guide to, and they're like Regency, I guess. But this one follows a woman who is a journalist, I guess. And she is a widow. Her husband had this newspaper. When he died, he left the newspaper to her. And so she runs the newspaper and she doesn't want to get married again. She doesn't want anyone to take this newspaper from her because she likes being a journalist. And there are these murders that are happening and they've got this guy in prison, but she doesn't think it's the right guy. So she's investigating and she has this romance with the actual like police investigator. And that's sort of what the book is about. And it was cute. It was very fun. I'm so glad that I read it. You see, I say that I don't like cozies. This was pretty low stakes, but for whatever reason, I really had a great time with it. So I don't know if I need cozies with like stronger romantic plot lines and that will work for me or what. But I had a great time. I'm so glad that I read it. Another book that I gave 4 stars that I am like so happy that I finally read, really good actually, by Monica Heisey. And there's another book that I'm going to talk about in my 5 stars that is like very similar in vibe to this. And this is actually pretty, I wouldn't say similar to the Coco Mellers book because the Coco Mellers book is much more like melodramatic than this, but this is a very character-driven book. And the premise is there's this woman who is getting divorced and her husband has left her and he's taken their cat and they had this agreement that their cat was going to be shared custody between them, but he's blocked her on everything. He won't call her back and she's trying to just like wrap her mind around this divorce. And I will say, it got to a point where I found her so insufferable to read from, but also she has terrible friends. Like she's going through this like horrible divorce. She's been with this guy for like 11 or 12 years and all of her friends are like, well, you probably shouldn't have gotten married in your 20s anyway. Like who gets married in their 20s, blah, blah, blah. But like her friends, she talks about how she's been there with her friends through like drunken hookups, like messy pregnancy scares, like all this stuff that has been going on in her friends' lives. But suddenly she needs her friend support and they're all like, I'm sorry, we're adults. Please act like an adult. And it just drove me nuts. So that was really frustrating for me. But it's the thing where like, you can tell the author wants you to side with the friends. It's like that scene in The Devil Wears Prada when all of her friends are making fun of Anne Hathaway's character for becoming materialistic. And she's like, I'm sorry. I'm finally in a job that I enjoy and I'm doing really well and you're all mad at me. But it's the opposite. She's finally needing help and all of her friends are ignoring her. So I hated that. But she ends up getting this therapist and like things go better. But it's like basically a year or 2 years, something like that in her life without like in the aftermath of a divorce that she did not see coming and did not understand. And I really enjoyed it. Like I really resonated with a lot of parts of this. I will say the first half, I was enjoying it. I was getting to where I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And then I started enjoying it again at the end. So that's why it got 4 stars. I do think it has a 5-star ending for me personally, but 4-star all around book. Really great. Really good, actually. Haha. And the last book that I gave 4 stars, I also read for the Dragon blog that I did. So I will link that for you again, or I will have already linked it. Hopefully I'll remember to put the vlogs that I talk about in the, what is it called? The box below. This is To Shape a Dragon's Breath by Monoquill Blackgoose. And this was really, really good. This was my favorite dragon in each of these books, which I talk about more in that vlog. But it's about this girl who is indigenous. And it's not exactly like the United States, but that's like the premise. It's a very like Germanic Norse society. I don't know. All of the names sound German, and the accents that she did was vaguely German, but the accents, I've listened to this as an audiobook. I listened to almost all of these as audiobooks. That's kind of the vibe that I was getting. But the premise is there are dragons, and when you have a dragon, you become responsible for that dragon, and usually it's seen as a sign of the elite. So the elite will have these like fleets of dragons, and then when a dragon lays an egg, they will put the egg in front of their children, and then one of their children will get this dragon egg, and they will become bonded to this dragon, and then they have to go through school to learn how to shape the dragon's breath, which is to make the dragon not dangerous anymore and to like form a bond. And our main character is indigenous. Her people used to have dragons hundreds of years ago. They don't have them anymore, but one day she finds a dragon egg, and they let the egg go in like, when it's hatching, they do some sort of like circular thing with everyone in the village or the town or whatever, and the dragon chooses her. And so it becomes her pet, I guess. Not pet, sorry. It's like it bonds with her. And the people on the mainland find out about this dragon, and they come and they tell her she has to go to the school on the mainland, the colonizer school, to learn how to shape the dragon's breath to be helpful. And so the book is about her like at the school, which I love a school setting, like a magic school type thing. I thought that was really fun. It's about her like meeting different people. There's another guy who's indigenous there, but he was working on the mainland for a family, and the dragon was supposed to be bonded to one of the kids, but it chose him because he was also there. And so that's like kind of scandalous. His name is Theode, and she becomes friends with him. She also becomes friends with like one of the servant girls, even though she's not supposed to. I will say, this book, I thought it was having a love triangle happen. It's gonna be polyamory, I think, which I think some people are really excited for. I did not buy into either relationship, so I didn't care that much, but your mileage may vary there. He also has this friend named Marta, who is the only other girl who's a student, and they have like they come from very different backgrounds, and so they're kind of always butting heads. Her brother also lives in this town on the mainland, and that's like very shameful for her family, and so it's about her relationship with him. I just thought this book was so good. Like there's so much like political maneuverings kind of happening. It's a very accessible world because it's very similar, I think, to like our world, and it's set in the 1840s. Correct me if I'm wrong, I think so. And that just like, I really liked it. It really worked for me. I'm saying all of these things because I know all of these things don't work for everybody. And as far as I'm aware, there's not a lot of actual magic. The magic is the dragons and the skills that you learn to shape the dragon's breath. There you go. It's like training, kind of. I did have one 4.5 star, and that was Ink Mistress by Audrey Coulthurst. And this I also read for the Dragon Blog, so I will link it for you. This book is about a girl who is a demigod, which means that she's immortal, and also means that she has magic. Like her blood is magical. I don't know how else to explain it. She can like change the future and the past with her blood. And she has had this relationship for a couple years with a girl from the village that she lives like up in the mountains. There's a girl in the village down below. And she has been being watched by this mortal woman, a guardian, but the mortal woman has died. And so now she's on her own and she's trying to figure out what like she's going to do. And she thinks that she's in love with this girl. So she thinks that they're going to be together forever. This girl tells her that she needs to get what's called a manifest, which is like humans in this world can turn into animals. And so that's like when you're ready for marriage, you can turn into an animal. And it's kind of like the last step in puberty, I'm guessing. But she asks our main character, Azra, I think is her name. She asks Azra to help her develop a manifest so that she can marry this boy and then become a village elder, because that's what she wants. She doesn't want to be with Azra. And Azra is like heartbroken by this, but she loves this girl so much that she decides to help her, but the magic goes kind of wrong. And then the village ends up getting attacked by these bandits. The girl that she loves, Ina, becomes a dragon. Like that's her manifest, is a dragon. And she decides she's going to go on this rampage and kill the king because she thinks the king didn't defend her village. She doesn't realize that it came from Azra's magic. And so she leaves to go take care of all of this. And Azra has to prevent her from doing any like harm to other people. And she also wants to go back in time because her blood can like change the past. She wants to go back and change it to where she never turned Ina into a dragon, essentially. And the book goes from there. This is a prequel to a series. I've not read the rest of the series, but I have added it to my TBR because I really enjoyed it. I was so close to giving this 5 stars. I don't know why it ended up being 4.5 instead of 5, and I rounded it down to 4 on Goodreads. but I loved it. Like, I may go back and change it. So that is my last 4.5 star. And now we're on to 5 stars. And I gave 10 books 5 stars, which is quite a lot, okay? These are not going to be, like, ranked as 5-star books. These are just all books that I gave 5 stars. I'm doing this in the order that I read them now. But first book that I gave 5 stars in January was All the Dangerous Things by Stacey Willingham. This is a mystery thriller book. And the premise is there's a woman who her son was taken from her home. He was like 2 maybe, or less than 2. He was a baby, but not like an infant, like a young toddler. I don't know babies' ages, to be honest. But he was taken from her home, and ever since then, she's been trying to find him, obviously. And her marriage has since fallen apart. She's an insomniac. She's got like a little bit of an alcohol problem. And the book is also told in flashbacks of her like meeting her partner and how like that, like it's flashbacks of her life, but also like she's kind of an unreliable narrator because she hasn't slept. And so we don't know if she's like making things up. We don't know why she doesn't remember certain things. And there's this true crime podcaster who hears her story because she goes to true crime like events and tells her story to crowds of people because she's hoping. She always takes like a list of all the people who go because there's a thing where like murderers and kidnappers and stuff will go back to the scene of the crime or want to be involved in the investigation. So she always produces those lists to the police and has them like run background checks on people because she's hoping that she'll find who took her son and get her son back. And everyone in the town has kind of agreed that her son is dead, right? So that's like the background, but the main like plot of the book is there's this true crime podcaster or writer or something, and he has a vested interest in her story. There's also a group of people who think that she killed her son, by the way. So that's happening too. And he decides, the true crime writer comes and talks to her and is like, hey, I want to help you figure this out. Like, we'll combine our research and we'll figure out what went on. And that's like what the book is about. It was so good. It was so good. I loved it. I was so invested the whole time. This is my second Stacey Willingham, and I gave both of them 5 stars. Well, the last one was The Flicker in the Dark, maybe. But I love her plots. I think they're so well done. She lays the perfect amount of clues. I had a great time. No notes. Another book that I gave 5 stars was 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first in a duology, but it's part of the Grishaverse world, which is the same world that Shadow and Bone is a part of. So in this world, there are people with magical abilities called Grisha. And this is set on, is it Ketterdam? Is that the island? But it's like an island with a lot of like rogues. This is a heist book. So it's very similar in vibe and like character style, I would say, to like the Mistborn books. But they're all kids, kind of. They're all teenagers. But there's this group of kids who get this mission because somebody has invented something that makes Grisha power way more powerful, and he's being imprisoned, and the person who hires the main guy in this, Kaz, wants to break him out of prison. So there's Kaz, there's the Wraith, whose name I'm not going to remember. I'm not going to remember any of their names. But like, it's this group of people trying to do a prison break, basically in the most secure prison in the world, kind of, and how they do that task. And I loved it. I had a great time reading this. I thought it was so fun. I love this more than any of the Shadow and Bone books that I read, which I have heard people say that like you're either a Shadow and Bone person or a 6 of Crows person. But I am planning on continuing and finishing out the Grishaverse. There's another book in this duology, and then there's another duology about a character who's at least in Shadow and Bone. I don't think he's been in this yet, but the characters cross over. That's why it's part of the same world. But very glad that I read this. Finally, I feel like I'm the last person in the world to read these books, but I'm glad that I finally am committing to it. Another book that I gave 5 stars was a really short horror book called Woodworm by Leila Martinez. This was translated from Spanish. I want to say it's like 150 pages-ish, and I really enjoyed this book. So it's about a house. How do I even describe this? It's set in Spain. It's about a house that is like haunted, and the people in the house are affected by it. So it's this woman who's living there with her grandmother, and neither of them can leave. Like, they can leave the house, but they can't like leave the town. The house has like a hold on them. And the house sometimes needs to be, like, it has needs that need to be met, if that makes sense. I'm trying not to give anything away, but this was so good. I had a great time reading it. I was like floored by the twist that happens, if you will. Even though like I knew, but I also didn't know, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't want to spoil anything. It's so short. It's really good. It's really worth the read. If you like a haunted house book, it has a little bit of like history of the house. So you see how the house is built and like who built it and what happened there. And It was so good. I love a book where a house is a character. I love it. It's one of my favorite things. Another book that I gave 5 stars is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. And this is a sci-fi book from the 70s, question mark? But it's about Dana, who is living in the 70s. She's a black woman married to a white man, but it's a 1970s, so that's a thing. And she keeps getting pulled into the antebellum South because I have heard people act like it's a twist. The book is called Kindred, okay? Do you know what that means? But it's her ancestors. And she gets pulled into this plantation. There's something that's pulling her there, so she has to figure out what that is. And it keeps happening, and she keeps like getting hurt and living like a slave. And it's horrific, but it was so good. I truly, like, at parts of this book, I didn't know if I could keep reading it, but I'm so glad that I did. No notes. Fantastic. I loved it. I want to read more Octavia E. Butler. This is the biggest one that I like know of from her, but I know she has other books, so I would like to read more of them. It's a show on Hulu, apparently. So I got a book with a permanent sticker, which I hate, but at some point I would like to watch the show too. So another book that was really hard to read that I gave 5 stars was A Well-Trained Wife by Tia Levings. And this is a memoir about a woman who was part of a fundamentalist Christian religion, and she got like more and more into it when she met this guy and married this guy. And it's about her getting into fundamentalism and being married to this guy, and they have kids together, and like about her life, and then eventually how she ends up leaving him to save her own life because she's being horrifically abused, and the lives of her children. And the worst part for me is she has a son, and her son starts to treat her the way that her husband treats her. And that was horrifying to me. But that's also what made her leave, basically. And it's so good. I don't know. It's also about like kind of the power of community and like female friendships, because like so much of this book is about him trying to cut her off from any type of community, like cut her off from her family. He's trying to cut her off. She has a blog for a while, and then he wants to be the one who's running the blog because she's not supposed to have it. And like it really is about like her deciding, somehow like finding within herself that she needs this community and trusting her community. And that's like a big stepping stone. So I thought that book was great. If you can handle it, I think it's worth the read, but I totally understand if it's not your thing. Another book that I gave 5 stars is A Lady's Guide to Scandal. So this is actually the sequel to the book that I read last year, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting. It's by Sophie Irwin. And this one is, they don't have character crossover as far as I'm aware. I think they mention in this book a character from the other book, but don't quote me on that. But like it's not like, I thought it was going to be one of the other sisters because that book is about 5 sisters. No, it's a totally different character, but she is, am I going to even remember this? There's a love triangle because there's a guy who is of Indian descent in this town who his family is like really wealthy. And so like he's kind of in society, but not really. And our main character is a widow, and she's mourning her husband, but she didn't really love him. So it's not like real mourning, but she decides to go to Bath for part of her mourning period. And she brings along her really good friend to go with her. And then she runs into this guy that she used to have a very strong romantic connection with, but she ended up having to marry someone else. I think it was like his cousin or something. Like she married someone, I think closely related to him, for the money and the stability. And now she has a second chance to like marry for love. And so it's about like their potential, like are they going to court? Are they not? She's still in mourning, so she can't really. And then this other scandalous guy who comes in to the picture and is just like kind of throwing everything amok. And there's also a clause, and she gets left a bunch of stuff in the will, but there's a morality clause. So she only gets to keep it if she doesn't have a scandal and bring a scandal to the family name. And so that's like a big part of the book too. It was so good, so cute. I loved the romantic connections. I loved the love triangle. I was really like having a great time with that dynamic. And I had a great time with this one. It was so good. I highly recommend, again, if you like a fun little cutesy romance, no smut, very clean. If you like that, these are great books for it, I think. Now is the book that I wanted to talk about earlier when I was talking about really good, actually. Definitely Better Now by Ava Reed. This is about, so it's not about a woman getting divorced, okay? But it's about a woman who is an alcoholic. And she just got 1 year. She's like in her mid-20s. She's like 26, I think. But she's an alcoholic. She went through the AA thing, and she's got her 1 year chip. Or she's about to get it, I guess, at the beginning of the book. But because of that, she hasn't dated for a year, because they kind of tell you in AA, apparently, I only know this from this book, so it could be wrong, I don't know. but apparently they recommend that you don't date while you're in AA unless you're already in an established relationship. So she has taken that to heart. She's been not dating, not seeing anyone, and it's about like her struggling to cope with her new identity as like a recovering alcoholic. It's also, she has an alcoholic dad, and so it's about her like relationship with him, and they have like a kind of hard relationship. So the book does go into that quite a lot. And then she also talks about her like relationship with her mother, and she ends up meeting a guy like right after her 1 year thing. And it's about her like forming a new relationship with someone else. And like, is that a good idea? Is it not a good idea? I loved this book. I don't know what about it. Like the main character I thought was so funny and like poignant and just like, I don't know, relatable. I'm not an alcoholic, but like, I was able to like relate to her depictions of her life and like her thoughts, even though they are not thoughts that I have. Does that make sense? So I thought the character work was really well done. I really enjoyed it. I had a great time with that one. I loved it. I would highly recommend it. Another nonfiction that I read and gave 5 stars is Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft. This was mentioned in A Well-Trained Wife, which is why I picked it up. But it is a nonfiction book about, it's written by, Lundy Bancroft is a psychologist who works, or worked, I don't know if he still does this. This book is pretty old. It's like 20 something years old. It's from the early 2000s. But he worked with families where there was an abusive partner, and he talks about patterns of abuse, and like he loosely categorizes people in different like abusive patterns. And he even says like abuse is not always physical, but a lot of the abuse that I saw, a lot of the stories that I have are from people who are being physically abused, because that's what it took for them to try this therapy. A lot of the people I work with, he does like group counseling for abusive men, and a lot of it is court mandated. So he tells stories about like the guys, and he says that a big part of his thing was that he would always call at home the women that were being affected by this to be like, what's he doing at home? What's he doing now? And to just try to get a like grasp on what was happening. And this was like his understanding after doing that since the 80s of like what triggers abuse. And he's very firm that like, it doesn't matter what you do. If you're with someone who's abusive, they will abuse you. And I just thought this was like so harrowing. There's so many stories, like firsthand stories that he tells about women that he knows from their partners being in this group. And he has like very few success stories of people coming out of the group and actually changing. But he talks about like what that would look like. And I don't know, I loved this book. I thought it was so good. He also spends a lot of time talking about what you can do if you know someone is being abused. And the things that are not helpful are things like you have to leave him, you have to do this, because that's what an abusive person does, is like takes away all of your agency. So the best thing you can do is give them agency back. It was so good. I highly recommend it if you have like any interest. I think it was really well done. Another book, sorry to like whiplash you, that I gave 5 stars is Lights Out by Nevessa Allen. Okay, if you don't know what this is apparently like a TikTok sensation book. I'm gonna give you the bare bones description, and then you can decide if you would like to read it. I was shocked how much I loved this book, but I loved this book. But it's about a woman who's a nurse. She's a trauma nurse, I think, and she follows this thirst account on Instagram. And the thirst account is like a hot guy who's like shirtless. He wears a mask, and he like puts fake blood on himself and like does thirst traps. If you don't know what a thirst trap is, it's like muscles, you know? I'm specifically explaining that for Buzz because I don't know if Buzz knows what a thirst trap is. But the premise of this book is that she really likes this guy's videos. She's got this guy that she's been hooking up with, so she sends a screenshot of one of his videos when it goes up to this guy that she's been hooking up with and says like, would you be interested in trying this? And he messages her back and is like, I'm actually seeing someone. I'm so sorry. Because it's been like a couple months since they've hooked up, I guess. And then that guy shows his roommate, Josh, this thing that she sent him and is like, this girl that I used to hook up with sent me this. What do you think of that? And Josh has met her because she's come to their apartment. And he always thought she was really attractive. And it's him in the videos. He's the one making the thirst traps. He finds out that she likes him or whatever. And he decides to break into her house and film a video from her house. And so he does that, and she sees that and is like, that looks like my house. And then she finds out that it actually is her house. Like, I don't know exactly what the clue is that it actually is her house. But then Josh is really good at computers. So she contacts the guy she was hooking up with again and is like, hey, your roommate's really good with computers. Do you think he could help me find someone who I think is stalking me. And the guy's like, yeah. And so he tells Josh, and then it's like a cat and mouse game with them because she's like kind of into it, but she also was like terrified that someone is stalking her. And that's the book. That's the premise. I'm not going to go any further than that. I loved it. I loved it. I had a great time. I love Josh. What a wonderful read. If you could like it, I think you would. It's very spicy though. I will say that, but it's very good. The last book that I gave 5 stars in January was The Truth According to Ember by Danica Nava. And this is another book featuring like Indigenous main characters, which I'm glad to see more of them being more mainstream. Like I think this was in the Goodreads Choice Awards, which is how I heard about it. So very happy about that. But this is a romance, and it's about a woman, Ember, who is trying to get a job. And so she lies on her resume that she has an associate's degree in accounting and experience in accounting, because she kind of does. Like she's been sort of under the table running the books for her friend who makes jewelry. She just makes it sound like a bigger thing than it is. She also works at the bowling alley, and she has to like count the till and stuff. So she's embellished, okay? And she's taken some accounting classes, but she had to bail her brother out of jail. So she lost her tuition money. So she needs money to go back to accounting school. And she meets this guy when she's going to her interview who's also Native. But she's also, oh, that's the other thing. She's lied about being Native. She says she's white on her application. So there you have it. That's her big lie. And then she meets this guy on the way to her interview, and she doesn't think anything of it. She like thinks he's really cute. Turns out he works at the place that she's interviewing for, and he is the IT guy. And so like they have a romance throughout this book, but it's just about how her lies keep getting caught up with her, and her like trying to like run faster to get out of the lies because she does get the job, but then things happen. This was so good, so cute, so funny. I loved it. I thought the romance was really well done. I was really into the hero. Can't remember his name now, but I had a great time reading this one. I thought it was like, I don't know, I just thought it was really well done. It was just very fun to read, and I'm so glad that I read it. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you would like to, you can subscribe to my channel. I do post 2 videos every week, and I will see you in another one very soon.